You know how it goes, right? Just when everything seems calm and you think the roster is set, something out of nowhere starts shaking things up. And now the team's got one of those decisions that might not look huge at first, but could end up having a bigger impact than people expect. So, without further ado, come with me and I'll tell you everything in detail. Click the like button and comment. This season is ours. The Seattle Seahawks are facing a situation that could quietly turn into one of the most important decisions of this offseason, and it centers around a name that many fans might not have expected to dominate headlines like this. According to Field Yates, the Jacksonville Jaguars have stepped in and sent an offer sheet to wide receiver Jake Bobo, putting immediate pressure on John Schneider and the front office to decide whether they are willing to match that deal or let a developing piece of this roster walk away. Here's the reality of the situation. The Seahawks now have 5 days to respond. 5 days to evaluate not just what Jake Bobo has done, but what he could become in this system. And that's where things start to get really interesting, because this isn't just about a depth receiver. This is about a player who has shown consistent growth year after year, carved out a role on special teams, and started to prove that he can be more involved offensively, especially in key areas like the red zone. The reason Bobo was in this position to begin with comes down to money. Seattle originally chose not to commit a higher price tag, opting instead for a more conservative approach. At the time, it seemed like a manageable risk. But now, with Jacksonville forcing the issue, that decision is being tested in real time. This is where roster philosophy meets reality in the NFL. Do you pay for steady development and system familiarity? Or do you gamble on finding a cheaper alternative through free agency or the draft? And make no mistake, the Seahawks do have options. They could let Bobo walk and attempt to replace his production with a lower-cost signing, a draft pick, or even a post-draft addition that doesn't impact compensatory picks. That's the business side of football, and it's a route teams take all the time. But there's a difference between replacing a name on paper and replacing a role that has been steadily growing in importance inside your system. What stands out about Bobo is not just what he's done statistically, but how he fits into the identity of this team. He's been reliable, he's contributed on special teams, and there's a growing belief that he deserves more opportunities within the offense. Letting that kind of player go isn't always immediately noticeable on the surface, but, over time, those are the decisions that can quietly impact depth, chemistry, and situational execution. Now, while this decision unfolds, there's another layer to what's happening in Seattle right now, and that's the bigger picture of roster construction heading into the draft. Because as much as this Bobo situation matters, the Seahawks have multiple areas that need attention, and the latest PFF mock draft gives us a glimpse into how this team might approach those needs. Running back is suddenly a major concern. Kenneth Walker is no longer in the picture, and Zach Charbonnet is dealing with an ACL injury, leaving uncertainty at one of the most important positions in this offense. There's internal excitement about names like Emmanuel Wilson, George Haney, and Kenny McIntosh, but the question remains whether that group is enough to carry the load. Then you look at the defense. Cornerback is a clear need, especially after losing Tariq Woolen in free agency. Even though Josh Jobe was brought back, there's still a gap that needs to be addressed if this defense wants to maintain a high level. Edge rusher is another concern, with the need to replace Boy Mafe. And as always, reinforcing both lines remains a priority because championship teams are built in the trenches. Despite all of these needs, the Seahawks are drafting from a position that reflects success. Picking at the back end of each round after winning the Super Bowl is the trade-off, and it forces you to be more precise, more strategic, and sometimes more creative in how you build your roster. That's where the PFF mock draft starts to paint an intriguing picture. At pick number 32, the projection is Avon Terrell out of Clemson, a cornerback who brings exactly the kind of physicality and versatility that fits what Mike Macdonald wants on defense. Terrell has shown he can contribute in coverage, support the run, and even add value in pass-rushing situations. His 2025 season included strong run defense metrics and an overall trajectory that suggests he's still improving. And that's the key here. Seattle isn't just looking for finished products. They're looking for players who fit the system and can continue to develop. Terrell checks those boxes, and if he's available at that spot, it's the kind of pick that could immediately stabilize a position of need while also giving the defense a long-term building block. So now you start to see how everything connects. The Bobo decision, the draft strategy, the allocation of resources, it's all part of a larger puzzle. Every dollar you commit, every player you retain or let go, directly impacts how aggressive or flexible you can be in addressing other areas of the roster. And that brings us right back to the central question that Seahawks fans should be asking right now. Is Jake Bobo a player you invest in as part of this team's future? Or is he a piece you're willing to sacrifice in order to build elsewhere? Because this decision might seem small today, but by the time the season rolls around, it could look very different depending on how the Seahawks handle it. So, what do you think? Should Seattle match the offer and keep Jake Bobo, or let him walk and trust the front office to find a better option? And this is where things start to get even more layered for Seattle, because the Jake Bobo situation doesn't exist in isolation. It directly connects to how this front office is thinking about the wide receiver room as a whole, especially after bringing back Rashid Shaheed. That move alone already reshaped expectations for how many receivers this team realistically needs to carry and invest in. So if you're John Schneider, you're not just asking, is Bobo worth this contract? You're asking, is Bobo worth this contract relative to everything else we've already committed to this position? That's a much tougher question, and it's why this decision feels more complex than it appears on the surface. Because from a pure football standpoint, Bobo has earned more opportunities. There's a strong argument that his role was still growing, that his best football might still be ahead of him, and that letting him go now could mean watching him break out somewhere else. And that's always the risk in these situations. But at the same time, this front office has to think about roster balance. If you're already questioning whether wide receiver is even a need, especially with names like Deion Burks being discussed as a potential draft option despite that uncertainty, then committing more money to Bobo could limit your flexibility elsewhere. And we already talked about those other needs. Running back is unsettled. The cornerback room needs reinforcement. The defensive front could use more depth. These are not minor concerns. These are foundational pieces of a championship roster. And speaking of the draft, the deeper you look into that PFF projection, the more you start to understand the type of identity Seattle might be building toward. Avon Terrell isn't just a plug-and-play corner. He's a tone setter, a physical defender who isn't afraid to get involved in the run game, who brings effort and toughness on every snap, and who aligns perfectly with what Mike Macdonald wants from his defense. That kind of player doesn't just fill a gap, he changes how your defense plays. Then you look at Jennings Dunker, and it's the same story on the offensive side. This is a player who brings consistency across the board. Solid pass protection, strong run blocking, and the kind of athleticism you need in a system that relies on movement and versatility. He's not just depth, he's competition. He's someone who can come in and potentially take over a starting role, especially at right guard, and elevate the entire unit. And that's the theme you keep seeing here. Competition, development, physicality. Players who may not always be the flashiest names, but who fit exactly what this team is trying to build. That's why even the idea of drafting Deion Burks, despite not being an obvious need, still makes some sense when you consider Seattle's history. Smaller, Faster receivers who can create separation and add a different dynamic to the offense have always had a place in this system. But again, it all circles back to priorities. Because every move you make has a ripple effect. If you keep Bobo, maybe you pass on a receiver in the draft. If you let him go, maybe that opens the door for a younger, cheaper, faster option like Burks. If you invest heavily in one position, you might have to take a calculated risk at another. This is what roster building at this level looks like, especially for a team coming off a Super Bowl win. You're no longer just trying to get better. You're trying to stay on top while managing expectations, contracts, and the reality that every other team is now chasing you. And that's why this moment matters. Because decisions like this, the ones that don't always dominate national headlines, are often the ones that define whether a team can sustain success or starts to take a step back. So as we wait for Seattle's final call on Jake Bobo, just understand that whatever happens here is going to tell us a lot about how this front office views its current roster, its future, and the kind of team it wants to put on the field in 2026. Now, I want to hear from you. Are you matching that offer and keeping Bobo in Seattle? Or are you trusting this front office to pivot and build through the draft and free agency instead? And if you want to stay on top of every move, every update, and every breakdown like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and click the video that's on your screen right now, because the latest Seahawks news is happening fast, and you'll find it all right here. Go Seahawks!